Welcome to the Global Swadeshi Dialogs. Tell me who you are.
Chris Watkins, online known as Chris Waterguy, from Appropedia. And yeah, Appropedia is about sharing knowledge for building rich and sustainable lives, for appropriate technology, sustainable living, improving the quality of life for everybody in the world.
And I'm Mark Chalmer. I'm a co-founder of AKVO. And AKVO is an internet startup in the water and sanitation development sector, if you can imagine such a thing.
Yes, just about. So I want to kick this off with a discussion about the role of the wiki, because Appropedia is obviously, it's a wiki that discusses exclusively water issues. Appropedia is doing appropriate technology over a very, very broad base. I want to talk about why wikis. Can you tell me something about why the wiki is an appropriate tool for appropriate technology?
Well, I'd start with the ability of a lot of people are aware of the capabilities of a wiki to, especially in very specific, focused areas, to really develop very excellent content that's very balanced very quickly. And from our perspective at the moment, it feels to us like the best way to develop really in-depth content that's on a range of issues that are important to us. There's something really significant that you have to address in an organisation like this, because we're today at UNESCO IHE's campus in Delft, and this building contains incredible amounts of information. Filing cabinets full of it, books full of stuff, and our challenge is how to remove the walls from this campus so that people from around the world can tap into the knowledge and in fact contribute to it, improve it, question it, and become part of the chain. But the difficulty is that just knocking down the walls doesn't work. People are used to structuring knowledge in certain ways, and they're used to, even in the development sector, and I'm from outside the development sector, but I was really surprised. It's all silos and everybody's competing against each other.
Yes.
And you sit and think, well, what's that about? And one of the most important things about a wiki is that people, if you try to compete in a wiki, you just keep changing the same thing backwards and forwards. But there is no command and control hierarchy that affects, well, until there's a major issue.
Yes.
A consensus has to develop, and that for us has been really exciting.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think you summed it up well, but probably like a lot of people, I've been thinking about collaboration for a long time, and how do we actually get this combined knowledge of so many people around the world with knowledge about development, with knowledge about how to solve poverty, how to clean water, all of this kind of thing, and put the information together in a way that you can actually find out the answers. You can go looking for solutions, and rather than just having a bunch of different sites all claiming different things, you can actually have something authoritative where you've structured the information, you've got sources, you've got footnotes saying, well, one opinion is this, another opinion is this, and here's why. So you've got something really in-depth and really useful. So when I found out about wikis, the first time I had a wiki explained to me, which sadly was only in 2005, I came very late.
You really got on top of this thing. You're like my wiki guru.
But at the moment it was explained to me, it was like, this is it.
I think there's something really interesting, because my background in the 90s was working in marketing and communication in big technology companies like Apple and Compaq and Hewlett Packard. And during that time, I became, and it's only actually very recently, last few years, that I realised that most of the ways that content is created are actually all about the endpoint output. So the brochure or the booklet. And most of the source material that goes into that content is discarded along the way.
Ah.
And even though we live in a, we're now most of what we do is produced for the digital age, for digital distribution. We still assemble most content. Most organisations, and not just in the development sector, particularly in the corporate sector, still develop content as if we're designing it for print production age, where you press the button and that's the final version and it's gone out of the door. And so many people have structured the way they work around that, and so many structures are organised around that principle. But the exciting thing is, often it's the source material. It's and it's about every piece of source material mattering. And just because that source material, somebody will have taken a pen to go, we don't need that. That bit's irrelevant. That bit's not needed. And then also it's often maybe done by a junior person. You don't want to, you never want to put that out to the world. And this kind of thing. So a lot of the source content becomes dirty somehow, and it's only the final polished version that is ever used.
That's a huge insight, actually. One of the things that we've been doing on the Hexiart project for years is we film as much as we can, and then we basically put the raw footage on archive.org. Yeah. And people who know how to do video are just like, you're crazy, nobody wants the raw footage. And I'm like, well, the thing is, if you're really interested, you sit down and you watch 7 or 8 hours of this stuff. And at that point, you know everything that we know. But I'd never articulated it in this idea that organisations cut that.
And it's really, and this isn't something wikis necessarily address, but knowing what people don't know is as important as knowing what they do.
Well said.
In fact, it's probably more important.
Totally.
Because that gives people a routine. That gives people a reason to be involved.
What you're talking about there is amateurisation. At least that's one term that people use for it, right?
Yeah, that's a very loaded way of, I guess, describing it, isn't it?
Democratisation is another word people sometimes use.
Depends who you work for and who pays you, I suppose.
Well, that's right. But
this
notion that people who don't have professional credentials or are junior in the organisation still have something valid to contribute to the knowledge base. Yeah. And I think that, this is something that's very strong on wikis, right? That you have no idea that you're arguing the 14-year-old in a municipal library who's, really knows their stuff on this one particular issue.
Yeah.
That you have this levelling of the playing field, and the professional production value, which was to cut away everything apart from this core, is now the inclusive production value of we don't really care who produced it, that's useful. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a very strong dialogue about this in, I want to say 2000, 2001, 2002, around the Clue Train Manifesto.
Yeah.
That was, really talked about that stuff.
Yeah. But
Clue Train Manifesto. By a guy called Chris Locke and Doc Searles and a couple of other guys did this book about markets as conversations. And it was talking a lot about how, companies that talk to their customers will do much better in the long run in the internet age than companies that are just broadcasting.
Yeah. And there are some, a lot of the issues that we're addressing with AKVO are about how do you take these things, because there are now more mobile phones in the world than there are toilets. Yes. There are more mobile phones in the world than there are toothbrushes.
Wow.
Yeah. My friend is talking to Nokia's in these guys, and it says that's a great line to use, isn't it, in general, to really try and get your head around this issue. Yeah. So,
Can you make toothbrushes fun
Could we build them into cell phones?
But what we have now, very rapidly. I was. One of our pilot projects is with an NGO called Fodra in a slum area in the suburbs of Delhi, Pratap Nagar. And I was there in October, and we met with the community, 35 community leaders. Not big. This is a small community, and there were mainly women actually. And I asked them who has a mobile phone, and everybody except one person put their hand up. And there was a very old granny at the back that kind of, I don't. And I turned to Thomas and Peter and Anka, and Thomas's wife, and just afterwards I was just going, that is just astonishing. Mm-hmm. This is a slum on the outskirts of Delhi where they don't have get proper sanitation, and most of them don't have toilets.
They've nothing except
Yeah.
the fun.
So how we come to terms with this over time is really the challenge. It's incredibly exciting, but because in theory now between us and some of the other people that so if we wanted to, we could put together a team over the next probably 48 hours, 72 hours. Allow a bit of time zone difference. We could put together a team to redesign almost anything, or to focus on a specific problem, and we could identify a load of people over the web who are absolutely leaders in that area. Mm-hmm. And if you get to a situation where those leaders in that area have an amazing network of people under them, or not under them maybe, or connected to them.
Certainly an amazing people who are looking at them to figure out what to do.
But the big problem at the moment in a lot of this stuff is that all of the people who are brilliant at it, or recognise brilliant at it, are too busy, tied up on things they're committed to do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And often those things that they're committed to do, they may be bored of, but they pay the bills or whatever. And it's only a very, very rare breed of people. And you see some of them in Silicon Valley, and you see some of them elsewhere, who have this amazing flexibility in how they spend their time. Actually daily, so that everything they're doing is constantly changing, depending on where they're needed most. Mm-hmm. And I'm very excited about that as an opportunity for the future, and that's something that AKVO is touching on. But I think what you're looking at in terms of your new types of design and new types of collaboration is absolutely about.
And one of the sayings that we have, sort of around the global Swadeshi thing, is that the real power of the network is that every decision can be made by the person best qualified to make that decision globally. You get to a point where a choice has to be made, and in the age of the internet, you can put that data in front of the most qualified global individual, and they can pick. And over the broad picture...
provided they've got the context.
Well, provided they have the context.
Yeah. And I think the context is really interesting, and that's one of the things, because one of the things that wikis... I don't think wikis are great at creating certain kinds of context, but they allow people to answer very simple questions quickly that they may have taken ages to answer before.
Yes.
But how do you get a context into something is different. And we've started using Twitter, for example, in quite a big way, because that allows me and Thomas, our founder, there's a whole network of people we work with, and just allows us to know what they're doing and what they're thinking about. And it's like you've got loads of people in the room. It's ambient. It doesn't interrupt you, but it allows you to get a much deeper understanding of the context in which they're working. So, for example, if you want somebody's involvement in something, you need to understand the context of what else they're doing. Mm-hmm. And the same person, it could be exactly the same person with the same skills. Two different situations they're in. One of them you'd ask them for their help. The other you wouldn't, because you know that their head was somewhere else.
Yes.
Or whatever. And that context is everything, really, from that perspective. Well, it's a big part of it.
Sort of shared mind thing,
Yeah. And how you choose which people to use to solve certain problems is affected by the context that they're in and the timing and everything. And the more you can share about what people are doing when and what people want to do. But most people are tied to certain tasks where, we're all still children of the machine age. We're all told to go and sit at a desk in front of a computer. It's like a lathe. I've got to sit at my lathe this morning and do the tasks I've been assigned to do.
But this is a very critical thing, right? I broke that tie a couple of years ago, and it was just like, okay, I'm doing Hexier stuff full time, and if I starve, I starve. And there were certainly some close moments, perhaps not for starvation, but for it was a very deliberate jump to say this is what I'm doing. And what came out of that was a lifestyle where somehow or other I made enough money doing odds and ends of this and that, until eventually some people appeared and funded me. And the ability to be flexible to jump on opportunity. I sort of habitually keep 5 or 6 projects running at a time, and I only focus on each project when there's an opportunity to move it forward effectively. So I never get into a position where I'm brick-walled, but also at no point is my progress ever predictable. And I think, you're basically making that jump now, or you made that jump a year ago, right? When did you go full-time on Appropedia?
Well, I kind of went full-time on Appropedia effectively earlier because it was just something I was so committed to, and I was sort of trying to, doing some other things and thinking about, how I'm going to, shift out of the business that I was running and do something else to make a living. But at some point, it's like, well, it's hard to really keep putting in all these hours on Appropedia, just creating content, creating categories, creating tools, working with all the other people on the team and moving things forward. It's hard to put in the hours necessary to do that if I'm also thinking about earning a living elsewhere. So I gave myself a certain time period and said, okay, I can survive this long, and after that I'll have to cut back or get funding or something. But yeah, it's kind of a liberating decision to just stop worrying about the other stuff. Just
and most people in this situation, you have to compromise. I mean, it would be wonderful to be independently wealthy. Some people kind of go to LA and have a nervous breakdown. I can assure you I wouldn't. Because there are so many things I'd like to do, but you have to compromise to a degree. But sometimes the things that you have to do that pay you to do certain stuff, it all comes back and reconnects. I mean, in a few minutes, because we're working now, because AKVO has helped to shake out different communication styles, and one of our key investors, Netherlands Water Partnership, is now looking at, well, how do we communicate differently?
Yes. And
when we had no money in AKVO, because we ran out of money in October, November, and it was only in March that we raised our €500,000, our second stage funding.
Yes.
We ran out of money, and I ended up doing some consultancy for a big UK bank on the application of wiki technology. In that area, and actually it's been incredibly useful in terms of understanding a lot of the politics about how do wikis, how do people, a wiki can actually intimidate people. A lot of people, 1990s content management systems and intranets have done so much damage to the way that enterprises think about the future, because now they won't try things because they think, oh, it's just another intranet. All those lonely, sorry intranets where everybody's always going, well, you should put that on the intranet, and nobody ever reads things, and so I learned a lot about that, and that was basically a fire sale. I needed the money. Yep. So I mean, at the same time, would I, if I had the choice, would I not do those things? Well, yeah, probably not. But it's it's good for you along the way.
I mean, this is a very interesting topic, right? I know probably 60 people who are in a position of sort of personal dedication where they would go full-time on appropriate technology development. They've all got track records of success. And at this point, the problem is that this open, flexible working style has no funding system.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I started working for myself in 1997. I started, and I was a child of Charles Handy, The Age. I don't know if you've heard of Charles Handy, The Age of Unreason. It's a late 1980s book about the portfolio lifestyle, the donut organisation. I mean, Handy is a real hero of mine. And I left my job in a PR agency in London, working with Compact, to go off and create this other stuff that I do, and I was a portfolio worker. And in the first 5 years, I could count on one hand the number of other people that went in that direction, unless they were having a baby or they got made redundant. It's been a really intimidating. I think it's changing quickly now because there are lots of social media tools, for example, make it much easier for you to kind of cope with it. But you're right. I mean, the capital structures are not oriented around that at all.
They're just slow. Yeah. I mean, they're just slow. And I mean, what I feel, we see this a lot, right? I mean, Appropedia has 5 admins at this point? 6?
Well, officially we've got 7, I think.
7?
But yeah.
And probably that's equivalent to 3 full-time people? Something like that? Maybe 2?
I'm not sure,
Something like that. So, I mean, when you have something like Appropedia, it's pulling together 10,000 pages or so of content with the equivalent of 2 full-time staff who are essentially self-funding. The ratio of resources going in to product going out is probably 30 times more efficient than a lot of the larger, say, World Bank projects, right? But at the same time, how do we get all of the money that's supposed to be going to help save the world is going through these, very, very 1940s to 1970s organisations that are now operating in these old organisational constructs.
It's the difference between accountancy is managing money and always accountancy managing money well. And there's a lot of most organisations, creative people have a really hard time in most organisations, because you have I'm trying to think of something the other day that they come to me in a second about this, that somebody was arguing that most organisations claim to be committed to innovation and creativity, and at one level they are, and it's kind of brainstorms and things like that. But the rest of their organisation is designed primarily to shut down or disprove or close off what they try to create.
Wow, that's kind of a major insight. So I want to bring this back to the question of wikis and what's beyond wikis, right? I mean, AKVO's current public face is Appropedia primarily, which is this large collection of water appropriate technology resources.
Yeah, and this is something that is going to change because there are three elements to AKVO, and AKVO is about making sure that the right projects are designed and specified.
Okay.
And that's where the Appropedia comes in, and the other two components are about matching funds to projects. So think eBay, but for hey, I want to spend some money on this, and go scrolling through and identifying projects. And that might be a consumer eventually, if we're in partnership with a FMCG brand. But for now, it's a development banker.
Yes.
So looking at how to do that.
Yep.
Then the third component is really simple reporting, which is because it's too expensive to report in small-scale projects, so small-scale projects never happen.
Yep.
But with the wiki, the wiki has been our first thing, but we're building the other two things now. But it's incredibly important to us because it's how we make sure projects are well specified. But we've never intended to build a large organisation to feed it. But we also have the difficulty that we have a lot of relationships with very knowledgeable people in this space, but they are not educated to edit wikis.
Yeah.
They're highly educated in the sector,
yeah,
but they're not educated to edit wikis.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's easy to find people from outside who don't think inside the constraints that they do, but but it's a challenge because my instinct is to say we need to change the way people work here and in the development sector. But sometimes it's usually easier to change things from the edge.
Yes.
But, changing things in the centre is really, really tough, and easier to kind of sometimes eat it. But maybe we can borrow our way towards the centre.
So, I mean, I'm interested in this question of almost the business process of getting appropriate technology deployed from an internet base, which is kind of a mouthful, but right. We're all interested in this idea of taking knowledge and plans from the internet or some other source and turning that into kids with drinking water in rural Albonia. And the hard part of this is not knowledge, and it's not the money, and it's not the people. It's the bringing of the knowledge and the money and the people together. Appropedia does this very broad kind of lateral survey, and it's specifically focused on the knowledge, and it's volunteer based. AKVO's got this kind of survey within water, and then it's also got this element of
sanitation.
Water and sanitation. So water and sanitation, and then the deal-making aspect, just fundamentally it's deal-making.
Yeah.
And then reporting on the deals that got made.
So I guess in many ways we're addressing what I was talking about before about the capital structures, capital networks, because the water and sanitation development sector is just the same as the venture capital market. It's really difficult to borrow less than $1 million.
Yeah.
Or you can borrow up to a certain amount from a couple of thousand here, where you can borrow off friends and family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there's a gap.
Yes.
And that gap exists because it's too complicated to identify projects, to specify projects, and to absorb the reports on them to check that they
Right.
worked out.
It's there's an economist called Ronald Coase. I think it's Ronald Coase.
Coase, something like
That's
that.
right. Coase's Penguin and Coasean Equilibria and all that stuff. So he is did a bunch of work on the nature of firms and what industries have a business process that's split into 5 little companies and what industries have a business process which is a single big company. And it can be the same business process, but different industries do it in different ways. What I'm fascinated by is, the AKVO model is the knowledge and the deal making with capital, and then ground teams, which are local NGOs, right?
Yes. I'm always working with ground teams who are local NGOs. But often for the people who are putting the capital in, we're trying to create a very direct sense of connection between them and the eventual project.
Right, which is kind of like
it doesn't just it's very you've been very heavily influenced by Kiva, and I think what they're doing in terms of creating that direct relationship, I as an individual can choose which project to fund and then invest. That's the critical thing. It changes. It's a very, very powerful idea.
Do you know about Fundable?
No.
So Fundable is like Kiva, but with no back end. What Fundable does is it lets any number of people get together to fund something.
Right.
And Fundable doesn't care whether it's buying a house in the country or whether it's buying 30 tickets for a show or whether it's funding a non-profit or an appropriate technology event. So, you could kind of have a tool chain which was Fundable, Appropedia, and, local NGOs that would work in, a similar kind of way. And what I'm interested in is this thing of the highly integrated sort of AKVO model versus the much more distributed, kind of strung together things that might come out of Appropedia down the line.
Sorry, Chris, if you want to...
I think you
one of the... as our initial priority was to work out how to build these core things, these core tools. But since then, one of the things I'm working on this year and into this autumn is how do we take this out to corporates as something that's relevant to them, to big corporate brands, FMCG brands, whatever. And this brings up some exciting opportunities, because if you can solve the reporting, the really simple reporting process through short SMS-based or SMS length information feeds, and a river of feeds rather than a quarterly or 6-monthly report by one guy that's kind of got in there.
Drill bit broke, waiting 2 weeks for next drill bit.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's not exactly the same way, but it's like twittering drill bit broke, can't do anything unless, or does anybody need our help somewhere? And then you go so whatever. But and critically, photography initially, video. Pretty quickly afterwards, we hope. So, because a picture of no toilet followed by a picture of toilet, hey, that's a report at one level. Yeah. And actually, much better is walking around the village, going in and looking at everything before and after.
Yeah. This is something. Marchin of Open Source Ecology. He's a guy with a PhD in, I think, plasma physics, who's now on 30 acres in Kansas. Designing the whole open source tool chain for farms. The core of what they're doing is very much oriented around documenting everything that they're up to, and they've just started doing these, every 2 weeks they're going to shoot 10 or 15 minutes of video showing what they spent their last 2 weeks doing, and that's what they're putting out there as funding.
Once you get this feed kind of happening, you can do a lot of things, but you have to kind of lead this, and the kind of content that comes through can be unstructured and different and doesn't have to all be identical. And in many ways, and I think Twitter's a good example of how this has changed things, is that people learn and develop new ways of always talking in short code and interacting. But what that opens up, once you've got that, are some intriguing opportunities. So, for example, what we've been looking at is how can you take, once you've got the matchmaking tools and you've got these reporting feeds, how can you turn that into something that an FMCG brand that at the moment says, we do corporate social responsibility. So, which is aligning ourselves on something.
Oh, I see.
Right? It's about how do we actually, I'm thinking back to proper, in 1960s America, around Madison Avenue advertising. How do we connect with a consumer in a different way, completely different level. And is the opportunity to say, right, every time you buy, it could be a bottle of water, and also the bleach and stuff like that's quite good, water sanitation, water or somebody's usually. Every time, I think the bottle top kind of analogy, there's a code on there. Go to our website, enter that code, and we will match. So you say you invest $10 in this project, and you can choose which project, and we will match that with another $10.
So you get your RSS feed from AKVO that shows you what your $10 achieved.
Yeah, and you can watch that, and there'll be maybe video of some. To be honest, the video ones may be slightly more expensive because we've paid an African film crew at Africa Interactive to do the interview.
And in fact, I mean, one of the core things that we're learning, right? I started deliberetely just doing video for the global Swadeshi thing because it turns out video is really hard. Like the number of mistakes I've made doing video, it's really, really difficult. And I think that amateur video is something that could take generations.
Oh yeah, and we're trying because we've got Africa Interactive has a great team of citizen journalists based around the African continent. So we're trialing two things over the next 2 weeks actually to get 2 projects filmed and see how that goes. But the point here with where this goes is you can say, right, so you've invested as well, not donated $10. Unilever or somebody like that has match funded that. And you might go, oh, yeah, but what if loads of people invested? I mean, there's loads of development banks out there. I mean, there's one development bank that's been sitting on $50 million that hasn't spent it because it can't work out what to do with it because it's too complicated to decide and to manage. So, they will team up with the development bank. But what this effectively means is you've invested in a project that you will follow, and you as a consumer become part of the monitoring and reporting system for the development banks. Oh. Because if something goes wrong with a Unilever, say, development fund, then you can be sure there'll be an almighty fuss. Oh yeah, corruption in it.
Right. But I mean, what you're talking about is distributing the responsibility for project monitoring. Yeah. So you've got all these people who are keeping an eye on what their $20 bought, and when something gets a little strange, wait a minute, they were supposed to be digging a well. Where's our well? Wow. I mean, this term surveillance? So surveillance is when the guy sitting at the top of the pyramid with the eye in the triangle stares out at the world, right? Surveillance is Echelon and the NSA and all the rest of these people. Surveillance is all of these people with their camera phones taking pictures of policemen on street corners. Right? It's this idea that you've got millions of eyeballs just keeping an eye on their local environment, and what this turns into is a significant understanding.
It also brings up many questions.
Sure.
And our designer Vincent Wyers, who designed our sort of posters, which kind of blew everybody away when we were in Stockholm.
These are
we put them in the toilets and people kept stealing them from the toilets.
They're really fun.
And the most development imagery is just sad people looking down a hole. Or especially my favourite is confused people one guy standing at a computer like this with a mouse, and then lots of other people behind going. And it just happens. You have to take. That's where you have to do a lot of control on a development project. Watch the photography, because people just start putting the standard stuff in.
This terrible joke, right? You can't trust these people. They're not selling hungry Africans.
But the issue, and what we're talking about here, is an enormous opportunity. It brings complexities, but it will at some point have to change how people make sense of their relationships outside of a zone of comfort. Because in theory, I could phone any of those women in that community in Fodra right now for no cost to them.
Yes.
And how we deal with that over time and how we cope with the ability to communicate.
Senior
across those barriers is really significant.
Senior aid agency people are beginning to get SMS messages from refugee camps. Like, hey, look, they cut our food shipments. What the heck is going on here?
There's something, at the moment, a lot of people, a lot of the kind of people that AKVO's trying to address don't have the ability to sell their need or whatever. It's a kind of difference if I'm in Delhi and you're mainly faced with people begging. Whereas when I was in Goa, there was a lady who ran a shop, and she was the best salesperson I've ever met in my life. And, oh, won't you buy from my shop today? And I go, oh, sorry, I can't. The next day, are you going to buy from my shop today? Oh, well, maybe just on my way back. And then she, but eventually I was buying all sorts of stuff from that shop. And quite a lot of money actually. But the point was that she had a market to sell to, and once you open these markets for people to be able to sell to, and you equip people with the opportunity to sell, then they're very capable of doing so.
Yes, these people did not survive for the past 15,000 years in these places.
Yeah, and what's the difference between a strip of a road down to the beach in Goa and eventually the kind of tools that we're building evolving into a string of villages outside Delhi, certainly finding ways to interact with people who've got more money than them, and that goes into it takes us into some very complicated areas where we have to work out how will that happen. But some of the things I have concerns over in terms of the sustainability agenda is sometimes that a lot of people think that sustainability is making India stay really pretty and beautiful in the kind of way it looks now. Isn't it nice if there's a man that kind of can paddle outside to provide power for his family for the rest of the day for if he pedals for 20 minutes. In the end, is that progress? I'd argue it's not.
Well, that's a very profound question, but if we get into it, you're going to be here for another 40 minutes, and you can't.
I've got to go.
So
I'm really sorry.
Oh well, no, this is far
I love talking to you.
This has been fabulous, absolutely fabulous. So, because I only intended us to go 15 minutes, but this is fantastic. So, finishing thoughts, right? AKVO is pairing the wiki for essentially sizing up projects and figuring out what technologies are available. A sort of matchmaking scheme to put funds and projects together. So a deal-making function. And working with local NGOs to actually get things done on the ground.
And a really simple reporting process.
And so to bring that information back. So, there are lots of other places that could adopt that model for areas outside of water, and it could be done in ways that didn't centralise all of those functions under one roof, but you would have Appropedia be the general overview, use something like Fundable to actually match the resources, and then if there are local teams on the ground who've got the ability to implement, maybe they could be doing the fundraising directly. It seems like this AKVO template of, look, this is how you combine these things, is like the first insight into how to really organise the whole process from shovels on the ground through to the funding, through to the engineering, essentially in an entirely online context. And now that we know that it's possible, housing seems like the next thing that somebody should be taking a crack at, because it's got many of the same properties. And
it's not just here. In the UK, Gordon Brown said we need to build 3 million new homes by 2020. Nobody's working that one out at the moment.
Well, I'm sure they're all going to wind up in Hexia.
You should talk to Thomas Bjelkeman, the AKVO founder. Sometimes he lives in this kind of yellow pointed roof house in the woods outside Stockholm. With his wife, who's a graphic designer who works downstairs. He's on some hermit. And when Thomas
that is my job.
Thomas. I should just let Thomas tell it. But when Thomas told me about it. And he was interviewed about this recently, and he said, Mark just went, this could be really big. In terms of where it goes.
Well, it's pushing the stuff in the wikis out into the material world. And that's a huge issue. And, it's clearly going to be something that's, many different teams, many different
and the key thing is you just got to focus. And I'm really pleased that we've managed to secure decent finance to start to build what we're doing. We're still got to raise more money this autumn to keep building it. And the thing that worries me right now the most is how do we make the Appropedia work well? Because we've got people here with access to an amazing base of knowledge, but at the moment we don't have enough people. that understand really what a wiki means.
Well, I mean, this is something where it seems like there's a natural partnership here. The Appropedia crew have an enormous amount of expertise running wikis, and maybe this is something where AKVO needs to look at pooling not just the source technology, but also the capabilities and culture from the open world, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
I don't know quite.
We could do that on several levels. We could do it on a matter of by default sharing our policies. Mm-hmm. That could actually save a lot of work. And all the way through to merging, that's a very big different issue. But there's all kinds of ways we could work together.
And I think that's a very important thing, that the working practices that go along with wikis. Like, I'm really kind of useless on wikis. I understand how to format pages and stuff like this, but the working practices of how the talk pages work and how people communicate and how the administrators come to collective decisions, there's a culture there that's not very well documented, and it's just as important as the software.
Oh yeah, and it's stuff that certain people want to do, but a lot of people don't. And you don't want to have to keep doing it. It's about coming back to the point again, there's a team in the world that can do something really well, and you can assemble them.
Yep.
And it doesn't need to be a huge team. But most organisations are based on their capacity to produce. And this is, talk about economics, this is back to Galbraith's Affluent Society, 1958, but still reads true today. It's worth picking up again, honestly. And everything is based on production.
Yes.
And how much is our organisation capable of producing? Whereas my final comment would be, at the moment, in terms of how capital is allocated, the big issue is that at the moment no financial value is placed on personal and organisations' network, and there's no way to quantify that, which seems really interesting in an era of explosion of social networks. How at the moment there's no way to account.
I have a friend who's got a BlackBerry with 6,000 names in it, which are all like director of NASA's research centre, and his ability to make amazing things happen with 30 seconds of BlackBerry activity,
And I don't know if this is some post-industrial hangover we've got, but the value is placed on your proven skills or your education, but value isn't based on who you know. Now, the relationships you have are in the world we're now entering. And your ability to connect people, to make things happen, to persuade people to join you on a specific project, is the defining skill of our time. It's just being a curator of people.
No, the whole thing about funneling decisions to the person who's best able to make them. The leverage that gives you over the pre-industrial age is astonishing. And that's limited by your ability to know the right person to ask the question to.
To have trust.
This is one of the reasons we started the whole global Swadeshi thing, that I knew all of these astonishing open source projects that were doing fantastic work in different areas, and yet the people involved only really had me in common.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is a disaster, I don't have the bandwidth. So the idea of pulling everybody together to one place with the forums and the social network, and you can see everybody's faces, and you can click on their projects, and we have weekly project reporting, and we're doing the interviews. The goal of that was to get cross-fertilisation, right? Yeah. What I'm hoping is, if I do the first 4 or 5 interviews, other people in the network will interview each other to do all the rest. And that will just become its own thing. And, we can move away from this kind of hub and spoke model.
Well, you can also move away from the fact that lots of people spend very large amounts of money and time travelling to boring conferences where they sort of all sit individually looking at a person at the front and then all go over and have coffee feeling quite uncomfortable, hoping they're going to get to meet somebody that's interesting so they can go back and feel like they got enough out of it. I'm not saying every event's like that, but a lot are. Well, there's an awful lot of people making a lot of money out of events that really don't deserve to anymore.
I have a very promising long-term solution for that, after which I'm going to stop recording because you must go. Right, I know you're getting on a plane soon. So the idea is that what we do is we establish a village somewhere in the moderately sane but poorer parts of the world. Right? It's got to be somewhere relatively stable, and it's the appropriate technology village. And everybody has their stuff there. You send your stoves, or you send your solar panels, or you build your shelters. And this thing is a year-round facility, and a couple of times a year you hold a conference there, and everybody lives in refugee tentage, and the rest of the time it's a training facility.
And it's constantly changing all the time. There's always new facilities, there's always new designs of stuff. You need to have some in different environments because of the context, but you need to define maybe 3 different or 4 different contextual environments.
You need a desert one, you need a shore one, you need But I mean, you start with one in the easiest place, and you have year-round people living there.
So
I'm moving in.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is exactly it, because that's the next step. You have to live in your own gear.
Yeah,
but it's something you were saying earlier over lunch, which was that the difference between doing something reasonably well and doing it absolutely right, so that you can prove the pattern works, and the design pattern works and can be replicated, etc. And most of the time, people aren't able to set up demonstrations in the right place and get things shipped around, and the cost of doing that is really high.
That's it. So what you do is you establish it all in the village. You have people like me and Chris and whoever else is interested live there.
And then you get people who don't have access to all the budgets needed.
That's right.
To ship stuff around to every conference and every trade show.
And when you do the big events happen at the village. Yeah. And it's all right there.
Love it.
So we'll do it.
Let's do it.